Hey guys, welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. I'm Dr. Joel Miller here with Dr. Tim Augustiniak. Guys, we're bringing you another good one today. We're talking through breakfast and specifically breakfast superfoods. We're talking about essentially how can you set yourself up, how can you set your day up to be the healthiest, have the best energy, the most balanced hormones, and so forth through breakfast. What kinds of foods should you be eating? When should you be eating? Should you be eating breakfast at all? And then what about what you're drinking? What about protein? What about fats? What about carbs? What about calories? All these different things we're going to get into today. And so we've talked about nutrition, of course, in other episodes. Dr. Tim, we had a few episodes just going through nutrition, and we love to talk about that, of course. But as we talk about, part of the root issues of just different health issues, health problems. We obviously tie in cortisol, the main stress hormone, to the body, and we tie in nutrition and how that impacts cortisol. And so we'll get into all of that stuff today. So, Dr. Tim, I'm glad to be here with you, and I think this will be a good one for our listeners.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good one. A lot of people have a lot of questions about, when should I be eating? What should I be eating? Should I be taking these supplements with my meals in the morning? What's the best optimal way to start my day? I often get those questions. And so, the whole goal of this episode is basically just how to start your day. We're calling it breakfast superfoods, but really it's the foods that you should be eating. But then also how to spot if, timing of meals isn't perfect for you, if types of foods are not perfect for you, and how to taper those things for yourself. And then also other underlying considerations that you should keep in mind regarding, different lifestyle factors or how you tend to do with stress or hormones and all that stuff. Because there are various nutritional things that you can do first thing of the day and incorporate into a daily schedule to keep up on nutrients that are required to detoxify things and support our processes. So it's going to be a great episode. I think it's going to be great. So our first thing on the note here, excuse me, the first thing that we have on our list here is just a question. Why would you say that breakfast is the most important meal of the day? And do you even agree that that's the most important meal of the day?
Yeah, I think I would agree. And I think all that ties back into this stress hormone we talk about, which is cortisol. So we've talked about this on many of our episodes, right? But essentially, as you sleep through the night, your melatonin is generally highest kind of as you're going to bed and kind of in the early parts of the night. And then melatonin starts dropping down as you sleep through the night. And then simultaneously, your cortisol is slowly increasing through the night. And it's when that cortisol gets up higher that it actually encourages our body to naturally wake up. And that's a beautiful rhythm that we talked about in our circadian rhythms episode. But one of the problems that we run into, especially in our modern world today, is that if cortisol is naturally increasing at certain parts of the day in the morning, there's certain things that we can do to actually exaggerate that cortisol response. There's certain things that we can do to make it worse. And then, of course, on the other hand, there's things that we can do to help our body to balance that and manage that as best as possible. So I would tie it, Dr. Tim, back into overall handling cortisol management, cortisol tolerance, and that kind of thing, as it's tied into so many other things with our health. So is breakfast is it the most important meal of the day? I would argue yes. And I would argue yes in the majority of situations. We'll get into that caveat in a little bit. And then I would argue that the reason why goes back to our cortisol and our stress hormones. What about you, Dr. Tim? Any thoughts to add to that?
Well, let me hear your caveat first, because we were, just so our listeners know, we were chatting about this before we started, and we have some, for once, we have some decently different opinions on stuff. So I think it's important that we get into that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how different they are essentially, but we'll talk
different
through it.
Than usual.
More
different than usual.
More different than usual. Yeah. So I would say that the caveat is for people that wake up in the morning and they just have absolutely zero appetite. Those people, if they kind of force themselves to eat, I've seen it kind of go either way. I've seen some people kind of eat a little bit of protein that actually helps their stress and helps their cortisol, because it's actually that their cortisol was too high and it was actually suppressing their appetite a little bit. So protein helps to balance out that cortisol and reduce it and help them handle it better. And then simultaneously in that situation, the appetite improves. They're actually able to eat more and handle more. On the other hand, I would say that there are times when people wake up and they just have absolutely zero appetite because their digestive system is all out of balance, whether it's bile flow with the gallbladder system or whether it's things going on with the gut health and that kind of thing. I would say that their system is so stressed that even adding in more food is not helpful. I would say that situation is one where I'll usually recommend people get up. I recommend they move their body, because in moving the body, that helps our body detoxify and move the bowels and cleanse the gut and things like that. And then I would also add in, just hydrating really well, getting a lot of good water, maybe even doing some kind of shots of good salt to get some really good and healthy electrolytes in the morning to help with hydration. Sometimes those things can kind of just help loosen up the body, loosen up the digestive system, and then they actually start to get the appetite a little bit better. But within 2 to 3 hours of waking up, I still recommend trying to get breakfast in that situation. But I recommend just kind of like letting the body kind of loosen up a little bit first. And the other caveat I would say is the person that's intermittent fasting to help with insulin resistance issues. So if you have high insulin, high blood sugar problems, sometimes intermittent fasting, where you just kind of restrict your eating window to about an 8-hour window or roughly 2 meals a day, I'll find that people can do really well by just kind of fasting through breakfast, eating lunch and dinner, and they do well with that. Obviously, the other option there is to have breakfast and lunch and then fast through dinner, which I think in some individuals, I think that may be better, but people really love dinner. So that one's a little bit harder to swing sometimes with patients. So those would be my different caveats. The person that doesn't quite have the appetite in the morning, their digestive system needs to loosen up a little bit. And then I'd say the other one is the person that needs to be doing a little bit more fasting to help with insulin resistance and blood sugar stuff.
So my opinion. So
Yeah.
I agree. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Jeez, I can't talk today. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And the reason for that, like you said, is the cortisol stuff. So if you do not set the tone for hormones properly first thing in the morning, you're not going to have a good day. It is exceptionally difficult to recover from skipping breakfast and having your metabolism and your cortisol, your insulin, all of those other hormones that are required to regulate blood sugar to normalize. And with that being the case, you basically have an entire day that stacks against your health. So what I mean by that, so we talked about it a million times when we're talking about metabolic issues, when we're talking about chronic illness, when we're talking about autoimmunity, when we're talking about hormones, literally anything that we talked about on this podcast, it always comes back to how do we mitigate the stress faucet that's turned on too high? How do we detoxify hormones and open up that drain that is clogged up by stress and byproducts of infections and all sorts of other toxins? But then how do we deal with inflammatory drivers and calm those down? And so it all kind of comes back to the immune system and the way that it'll skew and lead to problems in the long term. So if we do not manage this properly, you'll get where chronic illness comes in. And so if you have one day here and then one day there, and then these days kind of start adding up as time goes on, that's where you start that ball rolling that starts to snowball, and you can get to where you start to develop a little bit of a gallbladder problem, a little bit of a liver detoxification issue. And then on top of that, you're like, oh, I'm really tired because I'm not fueling my body properly. Let's drink some caffeine. And it's this positive feedback loop of stress and reducing resources to break it down, reducing resources to make bile. And it all leads to chronic problems where, to your point, about the patients or the people who, their digestive system is rather sluggish. If the gallbladder is not happy and that's a reason for the digestive system not working properly, well, I mean, what is bile made out of? The backbone is cholesterol. If for some reason you are driving too much stress, you're going to push cholesterol towards producing cortisol as opposed to bile. And so, I mean, I've never had somebody that has a gallbladder problem that we can ever really solve it if they don't eat breakfast. Yeah, I mean that could kind of fall back into the category of somebody who just has too high cortisol, but to the point of somebody who has a sluggish digestive system, um, I don't often find that sluggish is an used independently from a gallbladder problem. If somebody has a sluggish, the digestive system, almost always the gallbladder, or I would say always, in my opinion, always, always, always is affected by something, whether it's acetaldehyde, whether it's ammonia, whether it's, various, issues with trans fats because the diet's terrible. Regardless of what things are messing with it, it's always something that contributes to poor bile production and poor quality bile production. And so if it's really not good quality, the way I like to describe it is, if you've got, butter you put in the freezer, it's going to be nice and hard and you cannot squeeze it out of the gallbladder. But if you leave it on the counter and it spreads nice and easily, it'll be able, to be spread. Um, if you do not have that spreadable, butter bile at that point, things are not going to move. And that's where constipation is a very, very common issue. Um, all of these things all kind of feed back into gallbladder being dysfunctional, bile being poor quality, just needing more resources to produce bile. Well, the resources on the list to produce bile are things like vitamin A, taurine, glycine, vitamin C, resveratrol. There's a lot of different things on the list that can help make bile. And quite a few of those are also depleted when you have chronic cortisol production and chronic hormone detox issues. Trimethylglycine on the list that helps support bile. Choline, necessary to make bile. They're all involved with methylation and detoxification of steroid hormones. And so that's kind of my reasoning for why I am always, always, always in the ballpark of you need to eat first thing in the morning, within an hour of waking up. If you don't do that, if you've got a digestive issue and say you've got, a sluggish digestive system, and you may feel hungry later, it's just kind of making that problem worse, in my opinion. You need to, I call it consolidation of resources. Think of it like you're at a big company and there's way too many employees. You need to minimize waste so that the bottom line of resources for your body to do what it's intended and needs to do to function properly are available for use. And so we'll get more in a little bit into like what sort of supplements and things like that I tend to recommend to people to make sure that you're keeping up on these things. But I always tell people, man, you got to sometimes channel your inner caveman and just eat because you have to and not because you want to. Sometimes, it's just, you have to eat good quality food when it's necessary, or else, if you did not eat breakfast back in the day of the hunters, gatherers, cavemen, whatever you want to call them, you probably weren't as effective if you were trying to go out and hunt and actually thrive in a very probably vicious, dangerous environment and a dangerous world compared to what we have to live through today. And so we basically need to treat ourselves the same way. You need to have fuel for your body to quit producing cortisol so you can save that cholesterol, save other resources so you can make bile and other necessary things in your body while not depleting things that you have to constantly supplement if you're just skipping meals all the time. Now, that's the whole, hour within waking up argument, because as soon as you go beyond that mark, I mean, even right away, you're producing cortisol. If you could, immediately waking up and eating is probably even better for you. But in regards to those who do intermittent fasting, I think that's an important caveat to make. And I don't necessarily disagree with you on that one. I more so want to touch on my recommendation for when people do intermittent fasting. I have had way too many people come into the office that say, I've been intermittent fasting for, a year, 6 months, year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is. And I just, God, I felt so good for like, 2-3 months. And all of a sudden, bam, I just started feeling like garbage. So with that being the case, you go from having insulin issues where, insulin's way too high in your battery, that is your adrenals, your cortisol is nice and full. You can afford to produce some cortisol and deplete that battery a little bit to help with the insulin resistance. But if you carry that activity on for way too long, you're going to get where your adrenals are going to get bottomed out very, very, very quickly. And so with intermittent fasting, I usually recommend, if you're going to do like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Allow your body time to heal and regulate itself, and just make sure that you're doing really, really good quality breakfast and foods like that. Or like you said, whatever meal you're skipping, when you're intermittent fasting, just make sure that you are make sure that you're getting good quality stuff instead of, tons of sugar, things like that. I think touching on when we get into what kinds of foods and things like that, getting into quantities, like you said, all that stuff will be very important. But it's all about, ratios within meals. So then that way you're not spiking insulin or spiking cortisol in order to regulate things. Because as soon as that gets thrown off, that's the whole reason that breakfast is so important. You're giving your body lots of fuel to regulate blood sugar in the morning, but then you're also fueling it to repair your own tissues and all that stuff as the day goes on. So anyway, don't intermittent fast forever. If you're going to do it, a couple weeks on, couple weeks off.
Yep.
So anyway, that's my
Yeah.
take on stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
Same things that will lead you to feel bad eating first thing in the morning are the same things that need to be fixed by eating first thing in the morning. So it kind of sucks.
Mm.
I always say that to patients, but in my opinion, it's just something that you need to put your head to the grindstone and just get it done.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Dr. Tim, do you generally find then that when people wake up, they don't have much of an appetite and they don't really want to eat, that slowly adding in food a little bit, kind of over maybe a few days, a week, they kind of build their appetite back a little bit? Is that kind of what you generally see?
Well, to your point, digestive issues, that's kind of the problem. So we need to, here's the cadence that I normally explain to patients. First things first, we have to identify why is it that your gallbladder or upper GI system are not doing what they're supposed to do. Say the stomach's irritated because of a food sensitivity or an infection or something like that.
Totally.
Say the pancreas is irritated due to an infection, byproducts of an infection, hormones, food, something like that. Gallbladder, same thing. It can be irritated because of all those things. Identify the root cause, start detoxifying that, or staying away from the food, deal with the infection, whatever the issue is. But then from there, there's always is relative. 99% of the time, in my opinion, there is always a need for replenishing bile-producing nutrients. And so say you're driving cortisol and insulin all the time, and you're constipated, you feel like food just sits in your stomach, you're not digesting well. You kind of get that stabbing gallbladder pain every now and then. You're like, man, maybe I should get my gallbladder out. No, you shouldn't get your gallbladder out. But once we get rid of the cortisol and the insulin and all those things that are depleting those resources in the first place, whatever is irritating the gallbladder and causing that to be dysfunctional, if you get rid of that and then replenish those resources, you will start to make good bile, and then your hunger will return. What I also recommend is kind of like a partial little breakfast first thing in the morning. If you can really only tolerate just like a little bit of a protein shake, or something that's relatively light but still protein and fat rich, that's going to be enough to help cortisol at least start to come down. Yeah. And once it starts to come down, that's when you can incorporate the rest of your breakfast. And so we'll also talk about doing this, say you want to work out first thing in the morning. Unless you are deliberately doing intermittent fasting and your goal is to help with insulin resistance, I never, ever, ever recommend exercise on an empty stomach in the morning, because you are driving your adrenals into the ground. And if you're in my office, your adrenals are automatically going to be somewhat dysfunctional. Nobody ever comes in with healthy adrenals, or else you wouldn't be calling me, And so whenever that's the case, we'll say, okay, they're like, I can't eat 6 eggs before my workout, I'll throw up. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. I would too. But you need to do like 2 eggs worth of protein and fat, or like, 3 eggs worth. Do half or a third of your meal beforehand, so you can get cortisol to start falling down and actually fuel your body with food as opposed to hormones. And then from there, do the rest of your meal afterwards. Or say you're going to go work out right after work, and then you're going to push that meal from when we say, 5 hours apart, push that meal to like 6 or 7. We'll have a snack. But when we say snack, it's not chips. It's not, a handful of nuts. It's, a meat stick that's, high in protein and fat. It's a protein shake high in protein and fat. It's something that you are fueling your body with that is meal quality, just smaller quantities, just to get you through and get that blood sugar, bell curve to kind of go back up a little bit, just to get you to the next meal.
Cool. I like it. Well, I think for the record, I think I do agree with you. I think I agree with you on these things. I think it's maybe some different shades of things there, but I do agree. I think one of the things that you mentioned that I think is amazing that we should talk about here is that is the fact that with the muscle testing that we can jump into with patients, is we don't have to kind of like guess with this, or we don't kind of have to just like throw out recommendations like, hey, start eating breakfast, first thing in the morning, even though they don't feel like it. We can actually jump in and we can actually help their slow digestive system to overall just move a little bit better, move a little bit more, and really help that appetite from other angles. And so whether that looks like you mentioned, supporting the bile flow through supporting cholesterol, and things like that, or even different adaptogenic herbs and things like that that can help cortisol. There's different angles that we can kind of come at it that can help people, of course. And I think that, combination of things definitely brings back that appetite a lot quicker compared to if people were just kind of guessing and just kind of trying to just eat protein and things like that. So that's one of the cool things we can do for people. I thought that was worth mentioning.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally get it.
Yep.
So
Cool.
what do we got next on our list here? I guess
let's do this. Let's go through food, and maybe let's start with this. Let's start with like the average like breakfast that people are usually getting here in America, right? Like we find, you and I find with people all the time, and with what we are kind of told from marketing and ads and all these things, what a healthy breakfast is supposed to look like. So let's talk about like what it doesn't look like, and then let's talk about what people should do if they really want to optimize their health and energy and hormones.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm just searching up. I don't know if it was the FDA or the USDA, but was it like a year or two ago? They published these updated guidelines of like basically like you're in school, A, B, C, D, F gradings for food. And I'm curious to see what that list has to say again, because I looked at it initially and like cereal, like Cheerios were an A. You know, if you're to just eat Cheerios for breakfast, all you're going to do is spike your insulin.
Terrible.
It's
terrible.
But then it's graded like beef and eggs as like a D, which is terrible. And those, anything that you can eat that is not processed and it's just an ingredient, then that is automatically going to be healthier for you.
Always.
I always I had a patient who just raves about this line that I said on here one time. But he was like, man, as soon as you said, you need to walk around the perimeter of the grocery store when you eat, he was like, dude, that makes so much sense. Like that stuck with me. And I thought that was funny because I didn't feel that it was so profound, but this patient, he just always brings it up. And it's like, man, that was like the best line ever because it just makes so much sense. All the crap is going to be down the aisle. So you don't find cereal in the produce section, you don't have to have a refrigerator in the middle of the aisle that has cereal and other stuff in it. The stuff that's cold is the perishable stuff like milk, eggs, cheese, meats, all of those things that need to be kept cold because they're not heavily processed. But we need to be eating high quality, good food, lots of protein and fat. So here's my recommendation. Carbs are not the enemy. Everybody always listens to this and goes, well, where do the carbs come in? Carbs aren't necessarily the enemy, but for those who are watching the video, which I don't feel are very many people, but say you've got a basketball sized circle worth of protein and fat in your meal. All things considered, you should only really have maybe a softball size carbs quantity in your meal. If hopefully that makes sense to those that are listening. All in all, the proportion of protein and fat to carbs should be very heavily skewed more towards proteins and fats because those are what our body will primarily use to produce hormones, to energize our body aerobically, to rebuild our tissues and replenish all those nutrients that we talked about previously that help make bile and support hormones and all that stuff. If you just eat things like Cheerios for breakfast, you're just going to spike insulin. Anytime you have carbs by itself, I don't care if it's low glycemic carb or not, you're going to get more insulin production if you eat carbs by itself than if you were to eat carbs with a meal that is front loaded with the protein and fat. So the recommendation I always express to people for breakfast is have 35 grams of protein, 30 grams of fat or so. And with that, have a little bit of carbs, ideally whole grain carbs. So like sprouted wheat bread or sourdough bread. I'm fine with all that stuff. Ideally organic sources. of grains if you're going to have them. But then ideally, honestly, not even really anything all that processed. And so if you're going to have any sort of carbs at breakfast, oatmeal is great, as long as it's not, those, quick oats packets with all the brown sugar, cinnamon, all that stuff with it, or maple brown, whatever it is. I don't even remember what the flavors are. But as long as it's something that's a whole grain carb, fruit's great, vegetables are great, all that stuff's great. But then from there, you should ideally be making it about 5 hours or so without feeling hungry or run down or jittery, things like that that would demonstrate low blood sugar between your meals. And so go wild. In my opinion, you can literally you could eat just beef, you could eat just chicken, you could eat eggs, you could eat bacon, you could eat sausage, you could eat all these different foods. But if you're just carrying yourself on one meal to the next without feeling hungry, you met your goal as far as it goes for calories and energy that's necessary, or that your body requires to support itself. If you're hungry early, well, you didn't do enough protein and fat, so that means more. So this is the way to modulate it for yourself. If you feel tired after you eat, you did too many carbs. And if you mess that regulation up first thing in the morning by having, a bunch of Eggos with syrup, you're going to have a big insulin spike and not regulate your blood sugar properly throughout the day. Protein and fat is what you have to anchor your breakfast in. And of all meals, in my opinion, some people say you should front load carbs in the day. You should have a ton with breakfast. I wouldn't say you should have a ton. I mean, you're going to be more tolerant to them and you're not going to have as many insulin issues. But if you have insulin spikes first thing in the morning and all you have is carbs, or if all you have is like a little bit of yogurt with some fruit and stuff and some honey, people say, oh, I eat so healthy, and then they eat that. And I'm like, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's got to be, you can eat a lot of yogurt with, a lot of fat with it, I suppose, whole fat yogurt or whatever, but it's quality of foods does not necessarily mean that you are giving your body enough quantity to provide itself with enough energy and fuel to repair itself and regulate hormones properly. So that's, as far as it goes for foods, that's my take on breakfast. And like I said, if you're doing a bridge meal or some sort of snack before a workout or something like that, do 2 eggs worth, whatever a third of your meal is, do that beforehand, do your workout or whatever you're doing, and then do the rest afterwards. So
sweet.
Yep.
Sweet. I love it. That's it. I mean, you nailed it. So, and to emphasize again, like what we're told for breakfast that we should be eating, if you've noticed, is, to our listeners, it's all the high carb stuff, right? You should be getting your waffles and your pancakes with orange juice on the side, put your syrup on it, right? Maybe some more fruit. And it's just like, holy smokes, there's no protein here. And so it's, it's kind of funny because I know when we talk to people about what you should eat for breakfast, it's like, if people aren't super familiar with how we really should be eating for optimal cortisol management and things like that, then it's very maybe surprising and things like that, right? So waffles, cereal, all that stuff, man, you got to get rid of that stuff. But I do like the point you made, Dr. Tim, that if you do get tired, after you eat, that means your ratio is off. So protein to carb ratio, I usually find that people do well at like a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you get like 20 grams of carbs, you should have at least like 40 grams of protein. So you should have twice as much protein. The only time I find where those numbers should be different is if you're doing some heavy training or endurance, workouts, the carbs might even be a little higher. Still not necessarily higher than protein, but should be higher than, just half the amount of protein. And then on the other hand, if you're trying to improve your insulin sensitivity, which means you have insulin resistance and you're trying to get that down, then you might actually, make the difference even more drastic. Instead of, 2 times the amount of protein, you might even go 3 times the amount of protein, which means, if you get, ultimately what it usually means is actually cutting down the carbs, right? So let's say you're getting 30 grams of protein. Instead of normally doing half of that in carbs, like let's say 15 grams, instead you go lower. You do like 5 grams or 10 grams of carbs, that kind of thing. Or you might even go to 0, just depending on things. So Dr. Tim, let's talk like food specifically, and let's talk like how much, right? So you mentioned quality is super important. You mentioned quantity is obviously important. How much you're eating. Let's talk about that a little bit. Is there a certain amount of protein that you usually recommend people eat per meal? And is breakfast more or less? Like, what does that look like? And then are there certain numbers of fats that you're encouraging people to aim for, carbs and calories?
It's different for everybody. That's why when we're in the office, I just give the 35 and 30 number. But if you're looking for my honest opinion, you should be doing your lean body mass in grams of protein per day and just divide that by 3. So whatever that ends up being. If my lean body mass is, 150 pounds or whatever, I should be having 150 grams of protein per day. And with that being the case, 50, 50, 50 is what you're looking at. So if you're to eat 50 grams of protein in the morning, that's, I don't know the math on that. That's 8 eggs. It's a lot of food.
Yeah.
And so maybe some eggs and some bacon, some protein powder in a protein shake, something like that. It doesn't have to be, insane amounts of just one food type. I always use the 6 eggs example, and people always just look at me like I have 2 heads or whatever. They're like, oh, I can't eat that. And then that right there, it cracks me up because I have phone calls with everybody who comes into the office before they come on in. We have our phone consultation, and I'll be talking about, blood sugar issues, this and that. They're like, well, I eat really healthy. I don't have blood sugar issues. And I'm like, every single time. Yes, you do. I have had, I mean, I've got blood sugar issues sometimes. If you are not perfect with how you're eating, you're going to have blood sugar issues. But it's just so funny because then they'll come in and be like, I have my yogurt and then I have my fruit. And I'm like, okay, excellent. You ate not enough. But it's good. It's good quality. People confuse the quality over the quantity. So anyway, lean body mass in grams of protein per day. Divide that by 3. That's what your breakfast should look like. Beyond that, types of foods. I mean, whole foods. At the end of the day, I don't really care. I mean, some people be like, "Ooh, I need more protein. I'm going to eat tofu." Don't do that. Because most of the time when ladies come in for hormone issues, it's because they can't detoxify estrogens, and soy contains phytoestrogens, which means plant-based estrogens. You're going to utilize those as estrogens in your body. So animal-based proteins, I'll be a whole lot more clear with this. Typically, you should be eating beef, chicken, eggs, pork, ostrich if you're feeling, crazy, whatever you want to eat. Animal-based proteins are going to be the most bioavailable and the most complete to replenish our own tissues and fuel our bodies. I feel like there was another question you asked about that, but I don't think so. Types of
Calories.
foods.
Do you have any thoughts
Calories.
on calories?
I don't tend to get into calories too much because it's all a factor of how you should feel.
Yeah.
And using those indicators to see how you get from one meal to the next. If you're hangry, if you're jittery, if you're whatever, to where you feel like I need to eat now, you didn't eat enough. And so regardless of what the calories are, the quantity and the volume of grams of protein and fat is really what I'm going for. And whatever the calories do, that's an afterthought, in my opinion. Calories end up being, in my opinion, something that a lot of the fitness influencers will use as an excuse to eat like crap. They say a calorie is a calorie. Well, not necessarily, because
No.
yes, it is. If you're looking at it from purely a macronutrient standpoint and an energy output standpoint, but you don't look at it from the endocrine standpoint and how your body responds to each of those nutrients and macronutrients. It's, do you have insulin that you produce as a byproduct of it? Do you have cortisol that you produce? Do you have, what nutrients are demanded to break this down? There's a lot more that goes into it than just thermodynamics, and I think that's a huge hiccup that all these people online that are more in the bodybuilding fitness realm have zero idea what they're talking about with stuff, because it goes so much further beyond just the 4 calories per gram of protein, 4 calories per carb, 9 calories per gram of fat. It's so much more than that. And if your goal is just to lose weight, sure. But most people that come to our office don't want to just lose weight. They want to be healthy, and they want to know why they can't lose weight in the first place. It's because their body is just messed up from the inside out. Their metabolism, and they've got inflammatory stuff, you name it.
Yeah, totally. So in a quick side note, Dr. Tim, you mentioned the lean body mass in protein every day. So for people that aren't super familiar with that, in order to get your lean body mass, you're basically going to take your total weight, and then you're going to basically subtract like the body fat amount, right? So in order to figure that out, you need to know your initial weight, and then you need to know your body fat percentage. And there's obviously different ways you can go about getting that. Probably the most accurate would be like a DEXA scan, although most people aren't necessarily going to do that. There's different handheld devices and things like that you can do. But maybe the simplest, or at least easiest, that's going to be fairly accurate is probably just kind of getting the different measurements, like your neck circumference, waist circumference, things like that. And then you can kind of get it all calculated. And that's something you can just easily look up online and kind of figure out how to do that. So
Can I put in here
yeah.
real quick?
Yeah. Come on.
A lot of gyms these days will have like an in-body scan or some sort of infrared scan where they'll basically have you stand on this platform and they'll scan you with this infrared thing, and then they'll weigh you as you do it. And they basically print out this 3D, rendering of you. And based off your weight and the conductivity of, electricity through your body, because they'll have you hold on to something too. It basically compiles a couple different modalities of assessing body fat percentage into one and generates a, lean body mass or whatever. And as long as you're being consistent, say your goal is changing body composition, it doesn't matter if it's a little off, it'll at least give you a general idea, and you can taper things depending on how you feel. But a lot of gyms have that. So if you, are going to, Crunch Fitness or some sort of place like that, a lot of times you can do some sort of test like that with your membership.
Yep.
So
cool.
Easy access to stuff like that, because it can be difficult to figure out on your own.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. Now, Dr. Tim, well, you and I might be doing a variety of different breakfasts, whether it's like literally having grass-fed burgers for breakfast or, whatever that looks like. A lot of patients, I think what they found is like something as simple as like eggs and bacon is kind of the simple thing. And I think one rebuttal to that might be like, who has the time to make that? And that conversation gets into, well, you really need to be taking time to make your meals if you want to have healthy meals. But also I would say is just a way of life, spending time, having time kind of set aside to actually enjoy your meal and things like that is going to just be healthy for you and just be kind of a good, healthy way of life. So, all right, Dr. Tim, anything else with the food? Otherwise, we can kind of get into supplements a little bit. And if there's anything that we might recommend for people to take kind of in the morning with their breakfast.
I say we get into that. Probably shouldn't take too long. I know you as well as I, we don't recommend an insane amount of supplementation all the time, but there are certain conditions where, or I guess maybe some genetic issues like methylation issues, things like that, or, certain circumstances where people, they come into our office and they're like, hey, I've had this issue forever. I'm finally healed from it. How do I maintain this? And it's kind of a circumstantial thing, but there are some nutrients that across the board can be helpful. And, a lot of people can incorporate without really worrying about it too much. So, what are your top things that you recommend to patients if they're going to do something that's a daily thing?
Yeah, I think that's really the question. It's not so much like, hey, what should you take with breakfast, but it's more like a daily thing. And of course, taking it kind of first thing in the day is usually most helpful. So, I would say if I was to give recommendations for taking daily things, I'm always probably more hesitant than I should be for recommending different supplements, just because I know like with muscle testing, we can check exactly what each person needs and that kind of thing. But I think some of the general recommendations go back to like just overall support with stress. So like magnesium, like specifically magnesium calm, doing 1/4 of a teaspoon or 1/2 a teaspoon in the morning can just be helpful with like stress for the day. And then I'll recommend things like overall just immune system support, right? Like vitamin C, vitamin D, maybe a little bit of a fish oil to help with inflammation. But even with all of those things, unless you're doing a very small dosage, I don't recommend doing it just like forever. Because at some point, even though a good fish oil and omega-3 can be helpful for you, at some point, you can actually, if you take too much, you can actually get too much of the omega-3s, and then that can cause issues as well. So there's always with good things, there's always such thing as too much of those as well. So, but I think just the basic recommendations would be like a good magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin D, maybe a fish oil, maybe zinc, things like that. Those would be some of the basics. Other than that, though, I'm recommending, focusing on the food, focusing on good hydration. I think two things that I tend to to favor personally, but then also with patients is number one is getting some really good electrolytes in the morning. So the best kind of source that I found of that is just a really good salt, whether that's a Redmond salt, Celtic salt, pink Himalayan, things like that. And what those electrolytes do for you is they're full of minerals, and they can help you with hydration, so that when you drink water, it doesn't just flow right through you. Your body's kind of actually absorbing it and getting into the tissues and things like that. And so, obviously, putting salt on your food throughout the day is super helpful. But everybody, gets kind of intrigued with different little drinks and little things they can put together in the morning. And every once in a while, I'll tell people like, "Hey, try, apple cider vinegar, lemon juice, all that. You can try that stuff. I think that stuff can be helpful, even though it tastes not very good." But one thing that I've found a lot of benefit in is literally basically like getting 2 ounces, maybe 1 to 2 ounces of water, and putting in like a fourth of a teaspoon or half a teaspoon of some good salt and kind of shooting it. And if you put it in warm water, it'll diffuse much more thoroughly. If it's not, and if it's in like room temp water, it'll kind of sit at the bottom. And, either way, you're kind of swallowing the ocean for a few seconds there. But I found that people generally just have better hydration, a little bit better endurance. Their adrenal glands have a little bit better function doing that every day. So that's probably one thing. And then I'd say another small little thing that I tend to favor is some good raw honey in the mornings. Maybe putting it on a little bit of your food, or maybe on a little bit of a spoon and taking some. There's just benefits with honey for your immune system and things like that. So I would say that's probably one I don't hear a lot about, but personally I've kind of come to favor that a little bit for myself and for patients. So I would say that's pretty much all I got as far as supplements. Otherwise, focus on the food. What about you, Dr. Tim? Anything to add to that?
That's a pretty comprehensive list. The only other thing that I would add, and this is kind of just something more, I guess, personal to me, because I know I have methylation issues, but I would argue that most patients that come into our office have some sort of genetic SNP with their methylation processes. So everybody, hypes up the MTHFR gene mutation, but there's a whole lot of other mutations that are involved with methylation as well. So it's not just that one. But as a whole, with methylation, there's a bunch of different genes that will dictate how you do it. And if you are just not accomplishing any of those all that great, you're going to demand more B6, B9, B12, TMG, choline, magnesium, all the stuff. And so, back to what I said, consolidation of resources, mitigate all of the processes that are unnecessary that your body goes through that will deplete resources to do work that you cannot control and is necessary. And so with that being said, reduce inflammation, fix blood sugar, avoid caffeine, do all those things. But even still, if you are genetically predisposed to not processing things well and needing more B6, B9, B12, and you just want to live a normal life, sometimes you're going to have to take stuff. It's just the world that we live in these days. Our foods are not as nutrient dense, and our lifestyles just tend to deplete way more of the resources than they probably should. And so for that reason, the things that I will mention, some sort of methylated B complex. I typically encourage, if it's somebody that I have not seen in the office, or if it's somebody that I have seen in the office and they are predisposed to having gut issues and things like that, find one that does not have riboflavin in it. So riboflavin is vitamin B2. It can feed microbiome imbalances. And so if for any reason your microbiome gets out of whack and it leads to problems, it's going to make that a whole lot worse. Thorne has a methylated B complex called MethylGuard, and I carry that one in the office, and it is great. It has trimethylglycine, B6, B9, B12 in their activated form. So methylated B9 and B12, and then pyridoxal 5-phosphate for your B6, and then TMG. So that, in my opinion, is one of the best methylated B complexes. 1, because it's a reputable company. 2, it always tests in the office. And 3, it doesn't have nutrients in there that can be counterproductive for the most part. So that's that recommendation there. If you guys have been listening for a long time, we had our methylation episodes, and in that we had discussed methylation is, or I guess 75% of your methylation is required for producing creatine. And so if you have a methylation problem, take creatine. Automatically, it is going to negate the need for 3/4 of your methylated B vitamins to go towards creatine, it can then be pushed elsewhere to help detoxify things and accomplish other things that um, methylation does. And so it's just such an easy thing. It's such a cheap supplement too. I mean, of all the supplements, I mean, so many people produce creatine because it's super easy to produce, super cheap, super easy. And so you can get, months supply for like $30. And it's just super, super easy. You just do 5 grams or so per 100 pounds of body weight per day, and you'll be good. Um, that will, in my opinion, cover pretty much everything that you'll need in regards to methylation. And like you already mentioned, magnesium, that's on that list. You could take magnesium as well. It's just all depending on what problems you have and if that would be something that's beneficial. Because none of these things are something that everybody needs to do. If you know via labs you have low vitamin D, well, take some vitamin D,
Yep.
and do that every day and maintain it. If you know you have methylation issues and you struggle with caffeine and stress and hormones and all that stuff, do a methylated B complex and creatine. If you've got, chronic skin dryness, stuff like that, maybe do some vitamin A every day. You know, if you have inflammation and you know that your diet isn't all that great, you're getting lots of saturated, or I'm sorry, not saturated, trans fats and, your bad omega-6s. Well, take a fish oil every day. Um, it's all depending on what you have going on and what you are looking to maintain. It's more so understanding the resources that your lifestyle and your genetics will deplete and deliberately incorporating those if you are going to want to have, I guess, a maintenance protocol for something. They're all technically superfoods depending on who you talk to. That's why
Mhm.
every single thing that you find on the internet, somebody says this changed my life, and it's because every solution has a problem that at least one person's probably going to have that it fixes, and they're going to be happy that it fixed them, and they're going to swear by it. But it doesn't mean it's for everybody, you know?
Yep. That's good. That's good. All right, Dr. Tim, I think we're at the end of our topic here. Is there anything else that we need to add or kind of discuss before we wrap up?
I think we covered it. Honestly, this took longer than I thought. We really got into it today.
Shocker, Dr. Tim. Shocker.
Yeah,
No, we love
surprise.
getting into it. I know. Yeah, seriously. All right, guys. For our listeners, quick breakdown. I'm Dr. Joel Miller here. The practice is called Freedom Health and Wellness here in Flower Mound, Texas. You can find me online at drjoelmiller.com. You can find me on Instagram. If you guys have any questions or needing some direction or guidance with things, definitely feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to help you out in any way. And we appreciate you guys listening. Any topics that you'd like for us to cover, feel free to reach out and send us a request, and we'll definitely consider it. Dr. Tim, share with them about where they can find you.
Yeah, if you guys want to find me online, my website is draugustiniak.com. That's draugustiniak.com. You can also find us at flourishfwc.com. All those route to the main website, which is the draugustiniak.com website. On there, you've got links to all the socials in the top right, and then all the contact info for the office way down at the bottom. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out because we need help. We need help coming up with them. So everybody, please let us know what you want to hear us talk about. We'd be happy to chat about whatever. But yeah, thanks everybody for listening. This has been a good episode, and we will see you next week in the next one.
See you.